Hello, and welcome to... Well, it's Mother's Day, okay? Did you really expect me to do a live on Mother's Day? I know I've done a Twitch stream today, I've done a Twitch stream, but no, I'm not doing the brew ships and going on late when there's Mother's Day going on. I'm doing the Twitch stream because it keeps me out of the kitchen, and I've been banned from the kitchen because apparently my sister is cooking this year. So, yes, this is to replace the brew ships. I know you all enjoy brew ships, but I'm hoping you're going to enjoy this. It's Giulio Cesare. It is me talking about what is one of my favourite classes of Dreadnought, the Conte de Cavours, and their entire purpose for being, their reason for being. Because the Italian Navy, the Regia Marina, does not get enough credit. It really doesn't. I have a big love for a lot of their ship designs. They do some really gorgeous ships. They don't build enough. They never get enough. It's made worse by treaties, not better. But they do really cool ship designs. One of the classic examples I give is the fact that they build a Dante Alighieri, which of course is capable of 22 knots and has 12-inch guns and in 4 triple turrets, and it's just powerful. It's powerful. It's status. If it had been built first, then the Royal Navy would have had to top it somehow with Dreadnought, so that their Dreadnought would have been better. It would have been just to make sure that they achieved the Dreadnought status, rather than allowing the Italians to get there first. The Dante Alighieri is this gorgeous, gorgeous ship, and yeah, to be fair, she'll get a key ships of her own at some point. But then the French respond with the Corvair class, and the Corvairs are... honestly, they're ugly, okay? The Corbairs are really not France's best work. They have 2 twin turrets forward, 2 twin turrets aft, and a twin turret each side. So, theoretically, on the wings. So, they are carrying 12 guns. But they can manage a 10-gun broadside. And because of the way those guns are structured, each one requires a different aiming solution, because whilst theoretically the A-mount, the wing turrets, and the X-mount are on similar levels, due to the way they've been positioned and the motion of the vessel, they actually get quite different in terms of their firing profile. And when you add in the various other positions of designs in the Corvair, it's interesting. And the Regia Marina basically looks at the French and goes, we see your design, and we will raise you the Giulio Cesare, because you've managed to produce a 10-gun broadside to fight a ship which has a 12-gun broadside. And yes, you're building 4 of them. Cute. We're going to produce a ship which has got a 13-gun broadside, and we're going to build 4 of them. Now, why does that matter? Well, pretty much the Italians go for efficiency. Again, they had all 4 turrets be able to fire across both sides when it was the Dante Alighieri. All 5 turrets this time in the Giulio Cesare will be able to fire both sides. There's no wing turrets. They have 5 guns able to fire forward, 5 guns able to fire aft, and they have 13 guns able to angle out from to there on each side. It's all about giving themselves an advantage, and consistently from the get-go, the Italians build their ships to have a significant tech advantage over the French. It's actually almost embarrassing, because whilst the Conte de Cavours do, in theory, slow down to become 21-knot ships, in order for their extra guns and all these things from 22 knots, which Dante Alighieri was, these are also designs which are reconstructed to become 27-knot ships in the 1930s. To me, that always suggests there is something iffy going on with the hull design. To be able to be quite so easily redesigned from 21 knots to 27 knots, and yes, they do go from 32,800 shaft horsepower to 75,000 shaft horsepower to get that extra speed, but still, the hull has to be able to take it. The hull has to be able to take it. And this is where the Giulio Cesare comes in, because the Giulio Cesare is probably the best example of this class in its service. There are 3 of the Conte de Cavours authorized and built. The Conte de Cavour, Giulio Cesare, and Leonardo da Vinci, and I'll be discussing them all a bit during this. But the Giulio Cesare, named for Julius Caesar, has a rather charmed life. If something can work out with good luck for her, it does. And that is why she, I would argue, the Italian equivalent of HMS New Zealand, potentially the Italian equivalent of HMS Warspite, USS Texas as well, is getting the video, not Conte de Cavour. It wouldn't have been Leonardo da Vinci because, as I explained, sadly enough, she suffers a magazine explosion in 1916. And she is gone, sold for scrap by March 1923. She'd been salvaged in 1919, but that's really not much more that could have been done with her. And, honestly, that fate to her is one of the reasons why I am also so sure about the quality of the Francisco Caracola class. Because those ships, those vessels, which were going to build on the experience of operating the Conte de Cavours, the construction of the Andrea Dorias, which were themselves improved Conte de Cavours in many ways. Very much improved Conte de Cavours. Again, the same 13 gun layout, the same formation in that scenario. They were going to be good ships because the Italians were building on good ships, because their fundamentals of their design, as will be discussed, was maximum firepower. You have good quality armor, you have a good speed, a good profile, you have good training and doctrine, but you maximize your firepower to maximize your chance of getting that hit at long range. Having a broadside of 13 guns, well, if you think through most of the other dreadnoughts around in this period, there aren't many which match that. Even fewer which exceed that. It's an edge when you don't have any other options for getting an edge. They're good ships. They really are. So, shameless book plug. Well, this channel wouldn't work without your support. It just wouldn't. And I know I say that in every video, but it's because it needs to be said and needs to be thanked every video, because it doesn't work without your support. Without those of you who've very kindly purchased the book, those of you who like the videos, watch the videos, share the videos, those of you who are subscribed, who are patrons, who do Ko-fi, all those things round up there and down there and all over the place. Thank you. Now, yes, the target of the channel is to grow to 15,000 subscribers this year, at least. Hopefully by the 59 hours on the 24th of December, so that the bet is won between my mother and my aunt, and my mum gets a spa day. We'll see about that. It seems a long way off and a long way in terms of number of people watching the videos, but we'll see. We'll see. But thank you to all those who support the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to do even more for you in the coming year. thanks to your support. Hopefully I'll be able to do more naval history. And more videos and more other, and everything else which I can do. I will hopefully be able to do for all of you so you can enjoy it as much as I do. Because that's what this channel's all about. It's about sharing low naval history. It's one of the reasons why I have the competition going that I do for this. That you can win, that there's 2 chances to win a copy of the Tribals Battles Daring signed and autographed. And that's all because of your support. And I couldn't think of a better way to reward it. So, the Regia Marina's 2nd generation and longest lasting dreadnoughts. Look at these ships. They're gorgeous. They have a power, they have a presence. That's their purpose. When I look at the contrasting vessels they are built to engage with, be a presence with, I really do look at them and go, what the frigate? You know, you would expect them to match in, you'd expect them to be equal, but then you look at them and you go, that's not really the same thing. And of course, I'm not just going to say this to you. I'm going to show this to you. That is the Jean Bart. That is a French Corbeil class. Now, on the face of it, you're sort of going, well, they both have 12-inch guns at the front. It's a triple and a twin turret, but, you know, it's 2 turrets at the front, 2 are firing. But which one of them looks more imposing as a design? Which one has the bigger, more striking image? Which one looks more like something you have to be afraid of? These ships look like they would be fully happy having a fight in a bar or robbing a bank. This one looks like it wants to do my taxes. In fact, in the nicest way, compared to my accountant looks tougher. And she's a lovely lady who's a grandma. And the thing is, it's not as if the French can't design tough-looking ships. It's not as if they can't design imposing-looking ships. They do. And honestly, all the pieces are there. All the pieces are there. But it doesn't look like it. And there are other photos I can show you. And the question is why? I think the answer comes down to the fact that the Italians view their ships as an expression of art, as well as an expression of naval power and might. The French view their ships as a necessity of naval strength. And because of their different opinions over what defines naval strength, that's what causes the differences. Whereas the Italians just accept that naval strength is what their ships will produce, so they go for a powerful looking ship and they give it the artistic flair. Now you look at the shape and it goes up. From either end, it looks impressive. It's this beautiful curved almost shape to its structure outline, and then boom, and you know in between those funnels is another triple turret. You know you're looking at a ship which has 3 triple turrets and 2 twins, and it's very distinctive looking. You cannot mistake that for anything else. There is nothing else which looks quite like that in the world. Whereas this, as low down, as efficiency designed as it looks, and it is honestly one of the better French dreadnoughts designs. It looks like someone's gone, I need this to tick this box, and this box. There's no passion. There's no, this is a French ship. It's almost too sensible. And the real problem when you're dealing with capital ships is that image matters as much as reality. Because in peacetime, a capital ship's value is in its deterrence capability, its credibility. And credibility is about image as much as it is about reality. It's about training, it's about looking proficient in how you use your equipment, and it's about looking powerful. You can argue this is the better warship. You can make that case. I wouldn't agree with you. I'd say these ones are actually also the better warships. Not by a country mile, not as much as their imagery would suggest, not as much as their credibility in terms of their presence would suggest, but they are the better warships. But the reality is, if you have a Corbeil class in a harbour and a Comte de Cavour turns up, the Comte de Cavour is still in the show. And that's what you need a capital ship to do. It's another factor we have to think about when we're talking about the size of aircraft carriers. And the size of all modern warships to an extent. And their shaping and how they look. We need them to steal the show when they turn up. If they don't, they've lost part of the battle. The battle for hearts and minds first starts with the battle for the eyes. The eyes are the windows to the soul. They're also, more importantly, the windows to the hearts and the minds. Far more when you've got something sitting in a harbour than someone speaking to your ears going, it's really powerful, it's got this system and that system. You could be sitting there with someone telling you and talking right through and going, well, you know, this has got 12 12-inch guns and this has got 13 12-inch guns. So they are pretty much the same. And you're just going to look and go, they're not. They're not. So I'm going, well, they're both 21-knot ships. Yeah. But one looks good going 21 knots. The other one looks like, meh. And the real trouble with capital ships is their investments. They're going to serve your navy in this period. You'd be expecting at least 10 to 15 years, maybe more if you reduce them to ordinary. You might be talking 25 years. And for those 25 years, you need them to be capital ships. In the modern definition of the phraseology, and in the definition of the phraseology from that period. You need them to be, we have this. Not just, we have 9 capital ships. No, we have the Conte de Cavour, the Giulio Cesare, the Leonardo da Vinci, the Dante Alighieri. We have the Andrea Doria. We have the Giulio. They need to have an impact so that you list them name by name. You don't just number them. Especially when those numbers are in single digits. Once you're in multiples, once you're in numbers where you are 2 to 3 times the size of most other nations, then you can be numbered. Oh yeah, we have 30 capital ships. Yeah, you name yours. Because you can remember the names of yours. But when you're in a nation which is single-digit numbers, you don't want them to be a number. You need them to be a name to have the impact. To be able to stress for you and your peers, these ships have value. You have to pay attention to us. And that is the thing about the Comte de Cavour class. They are names. You know them. You will know them. It's the saddest thing about losing Leonardo da Vinci. It was a name. It was a name reaching for more, but it was a name. This is the design as originally built. It's a good design, isn't it? With that being said, let's look at what they look like. Let's look at these ships as they actually are. And they're interesting. I love this layout and I love this design because it does really highlight exactly what these ships are. They are built with the idea of we are going to bring maximum firepower to bear. Everything is designed to give that central gun the maximum as range of fire. Yes, it's a centerline gun. Yes, it's amidships. But you can't complain about its angles of fire because it can cover a large, large area. And then we start looking at their standards. Well, they're getting this for 23,458 tons in standard. That's 25,489 tons in deep load. They've got 1,000 crew. They've got a length of 176 meters overall. They've got a beam of 28 meters, a draft of 9.3 meters, and their power comes from 24 Babcock-Wilcox boilers, supplying 4 steam turbines to drive 4 shafts with 31,000 shaft horsepower. That gives them a top speed of 21.5 knots. A range of 4,800 nautical miles at 10 knots, which is fine. It's really good for the Mediterranean. This combined with their armament, which, as well as those 13 12-inch guns, which you can see highlighted in red there for this position, they've got 18 4.7-inch guns, arranged signalling and casemates. They've got 14 3-inch guns mounted signalling, and they've got 3 torpedo tubes, 17.7-inch or 450 millimeters, or 18 inches, the Royal Navy often called them. The armor belt, waterline, it's between 3.1 and 9.8 inches, depending on where you're covering. The deck is between 24 and 40 millimeters, or 0.9 and 1.6 inches. The gun turrets have 9.4 to 11 inches of armor, when this time that's pretty good. The barbettes are 5.1 to 9.1 inches, and the conning tower is 11 inches. Now, again, I am not the biggest fan of a conning tower. I regularly start to have problems with them. But there are certain navies for which I actually think they're sensible. The Regia Marina and the Austro-Hungarian navies, they are 2 navies which I will support conning towers for. Why? Because they're looking at having a battle in the Adriatic, and at the ranges that they could be engaging and likely to be fighting at in the Adriatic, conning tower actually becomes very useful. I think the reason I have a problem with a conning tower is, whilst it's theoretically a very sensible system, especially in the Royal Sovereign battleship era, you know, the sort of the era before dreadnoughts, when the engagement ranges are far closer and the weapons are that much more powerful. Once you start to getting to the larger and higher engagement ranges, what you tend to find is the admirals and the captains are not in the conning tower, which is there supposedly to protect them. They are as high up on the ship as they can physically get, so they can see what's going on around them, because they want to be able to see things with the Mark I eyeballs so they can make their decisions. Which kind of makes the whole point of actually building a special armoured space for them to actually be and do their decision making pointless. A waste of metal that's often quite high up in the hull. Yeah, I know it's not diplomatic of me, but that is my main gripe with the whole conning tower armor system, is that good reason to have them? Not particularly. But there again, when you're fighting in the Adriatic, you are likely to be engaging at close enough ranges. You can be controlling them from the conning tower, and you're also close enough that they will likely hit enough of those areas that it makes sense to be in the conning tower. And they have an active service. This is, again, all this class, all of the Conte de Cavours have an active service history. From the moment they are commissioned, they are active. They are viable. They are a core part of their navy. Now, shortly after the end of World War I, I have to admit the 76.2mm guns are reduced from 14 to 13. Mounted mostly on the turret tops, and they install 6 new 76.2mm guns in, which are AA focused systems. So they basically drop from 14 to 13, in terms of the original 76.2mm guns, and add in 6 more. And add some 2-pounder or 40mm or 1.6-inch AA guns for the forecastle deck. That is their post-World War One sort of evolvement in the 1920s. But their service... Giulio Cesare serves as the flagship of the Southern Adriatic during World War One. She saw no action. She was basically kept in harbour on alert to go to sea. Admiral Paolo Fallon de Reveal, who was the chief of the Italian Chief of Naval Staff, believed that the Austro-Hungarian submarines, mine layers, were too effective in the narrow waters of the Adriatic, and he didn't want to run his battleship into them. And that's why he kept his battleships back. Also, here's the thing, that gives him a good reason to do it, and good justification when he's talking to politicians, but he also doesn't need to. As long as the Austro-Hungarians are sealed up in the Adriatic, they can't really do that much. And let's be honest, if he defeats them, then whilst, yes, he can support the army, which might give the army victories, which will put him in a better position for the post-war bun fight over funding, but also he might find himself posted to Scapa Flow or something else. Because after all, he's got modern dreadnoughts. And if the Austro-Hungarians are no longer a threat, well, what are you going to do with the modern dreadnoughts? Are you going to keep them for dealing with the single battle cruiser that the Ottomans occasionally have available for operations? Probably not. A Lord Nelson is good enough to deal with them if they actually come out and actually do something seriously. And there's also some battle cruisers usually hanging around in certain places waiting for her. Alright, so if the Goben's being covered, what are you doing with them? What are they there for? Providing fire support to the troops? You've got some pre-dreadnoughts, sovereign sort of style battleships for that. You don't need them for that. So, yeah, if the Austro-Hungarian fleet had disappeared, the Italian battleships could well have found themselves at Scapa Flow. And let's be honest, they would have been able to take up with them 5 good ships. That's a division. That's half a squadron. Probably that means they get command of a squadron, and the Royal Navy rounds out with 3 other ships from somewhere in its fleet and goes, yeah, that's a full battle squadron. That wasn't really something which Van der Revel really wanted to do. Because he was worried if he got in that scenario and put under the command of others, he would be seen as a supporting navy. He needed to win a great battle against the Austro-Hungarians, and he needed to do it in such a way that meant he could then win the war. It was politics, and there was a lot of politics going on in Italy at this point in the strategy. And as such, Revel is blockading from the southern end of the Adriatic. He's using his torpedo boats to conduct raids on the Austrian vessels and installations. And he's prepared for a decisive engagement because, honestly, the Austro-Hungarians are some of the best battleships in the world. They were pound for pound, talking about a Tegetthoff class of the Austro-Hungarian Navy, of course, some of the strongest, if not the strongest, battleships, pound for pound, within the Central Powers. Because they represent probably the most complete and most sensible ships, the most well-balanced designs, especially fitting their national needs. And that is what the Italians were built to fight. Which, of course, then caused fun, because that then the Italians were building to fight the Austro-Hungarians. The French were then building to fight the Italians, so the Italians then built to fight the French. The Italians are in the middle building to fight both of them, and it's just causing... It's a freeway qualitative race, which of course filters into the fact that the Royal Navy wants to still be the strongest and needs to still be the strongest, most powerful nation in the Mediterranean in the world. So they're then racing against their qualitative race, and they have a qualitative race going with the Americans, and of course the Japanese are involved in that as well, because every time the Japanese up their level, usually buying in British yards or buying from British technology at this point, because they're still building their own infrastructure and technology up. The Americans then respond, and so the British have to respond. The qualitative race for dreadnoughts is wonderful, and again, I've done videos discussing that on this channel. But really, their World War I service, their 1920s service, it's about presence, it's about image, it's about power, it's not about actually fighting. They do have some interesting operations. Giulio Cesare and Conte di Cavour are part of Italian operations in Corfu. After an Italian general and his staff was murdered in the Corfu incident on the Greek-Albanian frontier, Benito Mussolini was being a typical dictator, in that he was looking for places to seize. There seems to be a common theme through history with dictators. They tend to want to seize others' territory, and they always start with small things no one else really cares about. Then they build up as they keep pushing the envelope, as they keep thinking they can go for more, because they succeeded there and no one did anything, so they can go for there. It's a constant gambling. It's kind of like a gambler who's addicted to losing. They're addicted to the risk, the thrill of success. And so the more you let them get away with, the more they will try and get away with stuff. It's always easier, quicker to stop dictators earlier. If you stop them at the beginning point, when they first do their first move in that direction, then you can correct them, and whilst they aren't probably going to reform and be a nice or hospitable human being, they might well get the idea that foreign adventures and taking over other people's territory is not a good idea, and concentrate on other things. Hopefully gardening. Maybe growing a nice rose bush. I don't know. But the trouble is, in the 1920s and 30s, the British and the French and every other government were pretty terrible at stopping people doing these things early. Which is why you get the rise of Franco, Mussolini, and Hitler, not in that order. It's fun, and there's others as well, but those are the three who are most remembered. The fascist European ones. There's also, of course, Stalin, but he's preceded by Lenin, and they do try to do something about that. But let's be honest, supporting the White Russians is always a interesting experience in futility and in fighting. He seized Corfu, ordered Italian troops to occupy the island, and, well, with Giulio Cesare and Conte di Cavour sitting there wasn't really much anyone else locally wanted to do about it. The only ones who could have probably done something would be British or the French, and neither of them felt like it over Corfu. Then Cesare became a gunnery training ship in 1928. She did a little bit of time in between the Corfu incident and the gunnery training ship role as a ship in ordinary, i.e. reserve status. And then, between 1933 and 1937, she is reconstructed at the Cantieri di Tirreno, Genoa. And this is where she turns out looking like this. Oh yes, this is where they go, well, let's get rid of one of your turrets, one of your triple turrets. Let's drop you down 3 guns. And let's bump you up 6 knots. I mean, she doesn't quite get to fast battleship status because that begins at 28 knots. I know, that's so arbitrary, but we have to draw a line somewhere. And the line is always 28 knots. That's why Yamato technically isn't a fast battleship, because she's also 27 knots. It's really annoying when you look at them, because you're going, oh, these 27 knot ships, there's not much difference. But then if you have a 27 knot ship, you then have to lower it down to, well, you then have to look at 26 knot ships and go, well, I can do 26 knots, so that's not much difference. And you'd be lowering it down and lowering it down. So you have to have a point somewhere, and usually we go for Dreadnought battleships, or sort of standard battleships, are anything from 21 to 28 to 27 knots. Anything 28 knots above, that's a fast battleship. That's the rough rule of thumb we apply. And both Giulio Cesare and Conte de Cavour went through these changes and upgrades. And when she has finished the upgrades, well, she gets to go to a review by Adolf Hitler in the Bay of Naples in May 1938, and covers the invasion of Albania in May 1939. She's providing support, and she's providing presence and image. And let's be honest, when Hitler turns up in 1938, he doesn't have a single battleship in service at that point. He doesn't. Not a single one. And I know there's going to be some go, well, Gneisenau commissions in May 1938. She does. But let's be honest, the Germans commission their ships before they go through their full testing and working up. Because that's how the Germans work it, so they can claim ships earlier. And therefore they can claim they build them quicker and they get them into service more quickly. It means they're not really ready when they're commissioned, though. It means they have a lot of work. It also means that the German state, the Navy, in this case, of course, by that point, the Kriegsmarine, takes on the burden if the ships don't work. Whereas with the Royal Navy and the US Navy, they have a habit of, we don't commission the ship till it's been through all its trials and we're sure it's working. Because up until that point, you, the builder, are paying for it. So, whilst technically Gneisenau commissioned 21st of May 1938, and that is actually slightly after this particular display, I'm still going for, even in May 1938, yeah, I'm happy saying he doesn't have anything. And he's looking at a navy which has a lot more. Because their baseline, even after they get rid of the Dante Alighieri, is 4 battleships. Add in Littorios. They got skills. They've got a fleet of ships, which is the advantage for the Italians. Now, let's have a look at what changes. Well, for starters, you might notice they've gone down a gun, but they've gone up 260 crew. They've gone down a whole lot of boilers. They really have. That is a big drop in boiler numbers. They've gone from 24 down to 8. But they've also gone from 31,000 shaft horsepower to 75,000 shaft horsepower. Again, it's British boilers, but we'll leave that to one side. And they've gone down to 2 shafts supplied by 2 geared steam turbines. And they now have a top speed of 27 knots. Or a range of 6,400 nautical miles at 13 knots. So you've got better range performance. You've got a far higher top speed. This is a far, far more powerful ship. It's also grown in length. It's 10 meters longer, 10.4 meters longer, really. Its beam, well, it's fatter. She's grown by 0.6 meters. And the draft has grown by 1.12 meters. She's a bigger ship. She's also now 29,600 tons in deep load. So, has put on, and I'm trying to be honest with this one, put on 4,111 tons, officially. She's grown something. The guns are now 12.6 inch. They've been bored out. There's 10 of them, not 13. 12 120mm guns in 6 twin turrets. 8 100mm or 3.9 inch AA guns in 4 twin turrets. And 12 37mm AA guns in 6 twin mounts. And 12 13.2mm AA machine guns in 6 twin mounts. The deck, by this point, has been upgraded to 5.3 inches to 6.5 inches. which was a real benefit over the previous, which had been 0.9 to 1.6 inches. So you have pretty much, well, let's be honest, increased the deck strength by over 400%. The barbettes are now 5.1 inches to 11 inches, which means that at the strongest points they're now roughly 2 inches thicker, or rather 50 millimeters thicker. And overall, the ship has been given a very comprehensive, very thorough working over. These are not the same ships that went in. I would also argue that, to an extent, they've lost some of their style, but I've also got those guns, those 12.6-inch guns, which are an interesting capability to have. It shows you what a nation can do if it's on minimum, if it's got some infrastructure, but it realizes it doesn't have a lot of money or a lot of time. And they've literally gone, what can we do best with these guns? What can we achieve that's the best and strongest with these guns? Sadly enough, the other problem with the new guns, the guns being now 12.6 inches, is you need new ammunition for them, which meant a whole load of ammunition contracts. And as we know, one of the problems the Italians have isn't so much with their capacity to produce shells or their capacity to actually build things when they have the available infrastructure. And the quality of the things they still produce good-looking, fine vessels. No, the problem they have is with quality control. These ships do look good, though. Giulio Cesare does look good. And when she comes out of her upgrade, well, she is a very capable vessel. Torpedo tubes, of course, have also been removed, and that's another advantage. That saves some weight and gives us space. And they did put in the Pugliese torpedo defense system, which I will cover at some point when I do the Littorio class, because I always feel they have a better application of that. It's large cylinder surrounded by fuel oil or water, and the idea was it would absorb the blast of torpedo warhead. The British have a similar system at certain points where they use crush cylinders inside of basically a water tank, which has got feed water in it. It's supposed to have feed water in. There are all sorts of various systems around trying to spread the explosive force of a torpedo when it hits and dissipate it over the hull and prevent it damaging an inner hull. So it's often an outer hull scenario, inner hull scenario, and how to deal with that explosive force. One of the really interesting things with all those systems, and it's worthwhile looking into if you're particularly interested, is the fact that a lot of the ideas which went into torpedo defense systems now go into car design, i.e. crumple zones, and those areas where they've tried to minimize the effect of impacts on the passengers. A lot of similar principles, a lot of the ideas that were developed originally around those principles, around those operations for torpedo defense, have gone into that area. It's just another random area where what we develop for war has affected what we have in civilian life, and the two often interplay a lot in terms of technology. Now, in the 1930s, after she's taken part in, well, the review of by Adolf Hitler, where Mussolini goes, "Look, this is what a navy's like. You don't have one. Ha ha ha." I'm presuming, and you know, he is Fat Boy, Fun Boy, Mediterranean edition, or number 2, depending on how you want to phrase it. Number 1 being, of course, Henry VIII. He is not always the most tactful when it comes to diplomacy, and I could imagine him saying, "Look, this is what a navy looks like. You don't have one." But probably wasn't quite that crass. And, as mentioned, the invasion of Albania, which was an Italian victory. But let's see, they sent 40,000 soldiers, 400 aircraft, 2 battleships, 3 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, 9 destroyers, 14 torpedo boats, a mine layer, 10 auxiliary ships, and 9 transport ships. And the Albanians had roughly 8,000 soldiers, 5 aircraft, and 3 torpedo boats. The Italian government claimed they had 12 to 25 dead and 97 wounded. Others put the level of deaths a little bit higher. Bernd Jürgen Fischer, for example, he suggested it was around 700. But in contrast, though, the Albanians claimed they had lost 160 dead and several hundred wounded, along with losing their 5 aircraft and their 3 torpedo boats. But again, Fischer claims they lost more than 700. So there is the possibility that Fischer is right. There is also the possibility that both sides are claiming they killed a lot more than they actually did. Because it sounds better, you know. We fought bravely, we killed lots of Italians. We fought bravely, we killed lots of Albanians conquering them. Far better than, we hardly fought, because basically they went, right, there's 8,000 of us, they outnumber us 5 to 1, and we ain't been paid that well. And the reality is, let's be honest, Zog's government, yes, the leader of Albania at this point is called Zog, had pretty much handed the keys over to Italy because he'd been using Italy as his primary ally. And then he'd been tried to resist because, well, he didn't want to lose his power, but he's basically kicked out and goes off to exile in Britain. It's one of those scenarios where the government had basically handed the keys to the next door most powerful neighbor. And when they turn up, they went, "We want to resist." No one's resisting. There were a few who tried. There were certainly a few. But I have a feeling it was very much a foregone conclusion. Most of their troops weren't even in the right places. The troops they did have. So it's not really a massive campaign, the conquest of Albania. Now, unfortunately, therefore, the Albanian war effort was not really much of a test of Italy's military capabilities. Abyssinia was more of a test, but even that wasn't a full-on threat. Definitely not a peer conflict. And that had actually gone bad enough. So the Italians realize that they are not ready for war. And this is one of the reasons why Mussolini gets the promise from Hitler there's not going to be war till the mid-1940s. When he's making the agreement, he's getting this promise because he needs to upgrade his forces. He needs to cycle through things through. He needs to get the Littorio class into service. He needs to get all sorts of things done to prepare his forces for war. Which makes it quite so silly that when Hitler does find himself blundering into war because he makes one gamble too many, Mussolini makes another gamble. Because, well, Hitler's going to win the war, France is full, it looks like it's going to fall, and, you know, he doesn't want to be out of the spoils, so he piles in. He knows his armed forces aren't ready for war. And, frankly, that's another problem for the Germans, because Italy is actually in some ways more prepared for war than Germany was. They certainly have a far more balanced armed forces and a far more capable fleet. But, and I mean this in the glorious Glutamus Maximus variation of it, but there are problems. Now, the fact is, Italy doesn't have the infrastructure or sustainment. It hasn't built up the resources it needs to sustain a conflict. It hasn't got the quality control it requires for its shells, because sometimes the battleships can fire a shell a very long way and hit very accurately, because the Italians do invest in a lot of very high quality optics and fire control systems. They really do invest in those. They have some excellent systems. However, more often than not, their shell dispersal is akin to you basically just picking up a bunch of beads and just going flick. Not even throwing them with purpose, just flick. And just seeing where they land, because of the quality control. So occasionally in a battle, they will score an absolutely exceptional shot, and you'll go, wow, the Italians are really good. And you look at the rest of their shots, and you're going, what happened to you? Are your crew terrible? Do the rest of you just not know what you're doing? What happens? It's quality control. It's quality control their ammunition. They have issues. And nowhere is this more highlighted than the Battle of Calabria, which takes place on the 9th of July 1914. It's one of those battles which is less well known, but really should be more studied. Because Cunningham's in direct charge, he has a carrier, he has 3 battleships, he has 5 light cruisers and 16 destroyers. And he's against Campioni, who's one of the more common and one of the more experienced Italian admirals, who has 2 battleships, including the Giulio Cesare, 6 heavy cruisers, 8 light cruisers, and 16 destroyers. So it's, to an extent, a balanced force. It is a balanced force in its own way. And I would say it's its own way. I would also say that the battle force you've got is Warspite, Malaya, and Royal Sovereign on one side, so a Revenge, a Queen Elizabeth, and a modernised Queen Elizabeth. Although Warspite should probably count as a class on her own, because it's Warspite and she's special. But the Italian fleet is Conte de Cavour and Giulio Cesare. Conte de Cavour is the flagship on this occasion. But what I do love is the battle at one point does descend into really a battle between Warspite and Giulio Cesare. And they are exchanging blows and salvos. The leading British battleships were Warspite and Malaya, with Sovereign behind. And Cunningham had managed to try and stick the Mediterranean fleet between the Italian fleet and Taranto. So the Italians, the only way for them to get home was to go through the Royal Navy fleet. Now, they spotted each other in the middle of the afternoon. They opened fire at roughly 1600 hours. 1553 is the hours normally given. This was at 27 kilometers, 27,000 meters, 29,000 yards. And the Italians opened fire first because of their very good visual fire control. And then Warspite and Malaya respond about the same time. 3 minutes into the fight, shells from Giulio Cesare straddle Warspite. They do really, really well. They straddle her. They don't manage to hit her, but they straddle her. So Warspite does a little turn, increases speed, and, throws off the aim a bit. And then the rounds from Giulio Cesare start overflying Warspite, and manage to damage HMS Decoy and Harewood, which were 2 destroyers, which were actually behind Warspite, peppering their superstructures with splinters. But, this is the thing. She has just been straddling, very little minor change. Honestly, her targeting system is still trying to keep on, and the shells are flying wildly around Warspite. It's so annoying for the Italian crews. At the same time, Warspite doesn't have the same trouble with quality control, and strikes Giulio Cesare at this point. The range has gone down to roughly 24 kilometers, 24,000 meters, 26,000 yards. The shell pierced the rear funnel, detonating inside it, which blew a hole about 6 meters across, and then started fires, and smoke was drawn into the boiler rooms, which forced 4 boilers offline because they couldn't breathe. Their crews couldn't breathe in the smoke, which reduced the ship speed, the Giulio Cesare, down to 18 knots. And this then decides how the rest of the fight goes, because Campioni has to worry about this very valuable asset, which has been reduced from 27 knots to 18 knots. It's a big drop. And that means even Royal Sovereign, which is theoretically only capable of 21 and bit knots, but is doing surprisingly well at this point, can overtake you. They turn away and they try and make it their way up the coast, away from the British fleet. Giulio Cesare is repaired by the end of August, and then her and Conte de Cavour again try to intercept British convoys. This time, those convoys are going to Malta in August and September. November 1940, Giulio Cesare is the most blessed ship in the entire fleet. And I have a reason for saying this. If I bring up a map, there you go. Here are the battleship dispositions of the Italian fleet at Taranto. Now, those two vessels off the side are Zara, Fiume, and Gorizia. They're larger cruisers. These vessels, these are the battleships, the ones here. You have, at the top, Caio Then you have Littorio on the outside. Inside of that, you have Giulio Cesare. And then Vittorio Veneto, Andrea Doria, and Conte de Cavour. That is your position of your fleet. And there are other maps which show it in slightly different ways, but pretty much it all holds true. Whichever way you look at the plans and the dispositions they put on them, and the drawings of them, the Giulio Cesare, whether by luck or by design, is the one which is the most difficult to try and attack. You cannot physically reach her without going over another ship. I have quite simply tried in using various forms of how do I put this? Wargaming systems, are usually computer-based wargaming systems, but other scenarios as well. And the lure of attacking the other options, even if you're in a dive bomber, proves too much. Giulio Cesare is in a blessed spot. Now, there are three competing theories for this. There is the Italians, who maintain it's just where they parked them. There is some who believe that Giulio Cesare was blessed by the gods. There are still others who believe that she was a favourite ship of an admiral, and the port organizers, and that's where she's put. I think it's probably a combination of all three. But I do think there is something about her having very good luck. Let's be honest, she gets in a fight with Warspite and escapes with what is pretty much superficial damage in some regards. She, is in this attack, and she is the most perfectly located. There literally are Littorios as her physical bodyguards. And who are you going to hit? Oh, am I going to try and bop over the Vittorio Veneto to try and get to the Giulio Cesare? No, I'm going to go for them. They're the newer battleships. It's brilliant for her. It really is. So, of course, she survives Taranto. She survives Taranto well and is happy. And, well, this is part of the reason why when people tell me Taranto destroyed the Italian Navy, I go, it doesn't. Because whilst the Conte de Cavour is sunk in shallow water by a single torpedo hit, Giulio Cesare, I said, doesn't get hit. One torpedo hit was enough for the Conte de Cavour to go down. They didn't get a single one on this baby, on Giulio Cesare. They didn't get a single one on her. So she participates in the Battle of Cape Spartivento, which is on the 27th of November, 1940. She never gets close enough to the British fleet to fire at them. But, she does participate in it. And she does well. She's damaged in January 1941 again. This is by splinters from a near miss during an air raid on Naples by Vickers Wellingtons are getting into the action. And she has her repairs at Genoa, early in February. Then she sails the Strait of Bonifacio to intercept a Malta convoy. It was actually a raid on Genoa. She fails to make contact with British forces. She participates in the First Battle of Sirte, which is a really nasty battle for the British. There is a debate over it. It's considered a decisive result, but if it hadn't been Philip Vian commanding the cruisers and destroyers for the Royal Navy, and he hadn't done as well as he did, i.e. one of the best commanders the Royal Navy has ever had, and certainly had available in World War II, and he really brings his A game in the battle, I think it could well have been a British loss. It's that fine. Yes, the crews, all the crews on both sides are doing very well and living up to it. But it is 4 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 13 destroyers from the Italian Navy, and it's 5 light cruisers and 14 destroyers from the Royal Navy. And the fact that the Royal Navy escapes with 2 destroyers damaged is a testimony to the quality of their training, skill, and their leadership. Because that should have been, in any other scenario, a loss for the Royal Navy. That is a preponderance of force on the Italian side. And that's the First Battle of Sirte. She carries on through the war. She does all sorts of operations. And she's reduced to a training ship in 1942, but she's also one of the ships which sails to Taranto, putting down a mutiny after the Italian surrender, and endures an ineffective attack by German aircraft en route. She survives all these things. The German aircraft are an attacker. It is ineffective. She has a mutiny aboard. It's put down. She surrenders. She sails to Malta, 12 September, there to be interned, and it's 17 June 1944 when she returned to Taranto, where she remains there till 1948. And after that war service, she goes on to further service. Yes, the Soviet Union gets her as their war operations. She's renamed Novorossiysk after, well, there was a Soviet city which is named in the Black Sea, and she's used as a training ship. They gave her 8 refits during her service. In 1953, all the Italian AA guns are replaced by 18 37mm 70K AA guns in 6 twin mounts and 6 singles. They replaced her fire control systems and radars. This was all just a temporary rearmament. The Soviets drew up plans to replace her 120mm guns with 130mm guns, and the 100mm and 37mm guns with 8 quadruple 45mm. At anchor, on the night of the 28th to 29th of October 1955, there was an explosion, though. It ripped a 4x14 metre or 13x46 foot hole in her forecastle forward of the A turret. The flooding wasn't able to be controlled, and she capsized. Loss of 617 men, including 61 men sent from other ships to assist. There is a dispute over the cause of the explosion. Official cause was that a magnetic RMH or LMB bottom mine laid by the Germans during World War II had triggered by the dragging of the battleship's anchor chain before mooring for the last time. Subsequent searches did actually locate some more of these mines, and there are about a dozen within 50 meters of the explosion site. The damage was consistent with the level of explosive those mines brought, but it was felt it was also consistent with maybe more than one mine. There have been other, though, discussions. Some say she was sunk by Italian frogmen who were upset with the transfer of the battleship to the USSR. Others put forward still more ludicrous theories. The reality is, it's more than likely the mines. I was reading that from my notes. I do apologise if you wrote. I was trying to be very careful because some of the ideas that come forward. Italian frogmen going and sinking her. If you do that, and I could understand the desire, but I don't think they would, you're risking starting a war in this period when, frankly, she's not that much value. There are Iowas, there's Vanguard in the world, there's all sorts of things still sitting around available to be used. What are you gaining from it? National pride? Well, she's already been lost. National pride has already been damaged. You're not really gaining much from that. And also, there's the other problem that the Italians often have very strong links with Russia. They've often got on. Yes, they disagreed about things, but they've often sold them stuff and had a fairly good relationship, and there was always quite a strong communist movement going on in Italy. It's one of the reasons why Mussolini managed to maintain power, despite the fact he really wasn't as much of a dictator as he liked to believe in terms of actual strength. Please note, he is removed from power with the equivalent of a civilian order, not a military putsch or anything like that. Not the normal stuff you see pulling down a dictator. Yes, that does happen later to him because of his second edition, but his first fall from grace is rather civilized. And if you consider the fact that in the Senate and Parliament of Italy, throughout his tenure, there are people getting up almost every day to slag him off and tell him he's being an idiot. Dictators who are truly dictators tend to not allow such open dissent. Mainly because they don't like it. They like their egos being stroked. They don't like people telling them that they are really not wearing any clothes. There are also some other discussions to get into in this ship, in whether or not she was fitted with a catapult, all sorts of things. But the point is, Giulio Cesare is a wonderful ship. She serves her nation well. I would argue she certainly looked more imposing in her original form pre-modernization, but there again, by that point, her original form was starting to look rather dated. And let's be honest, what you lose in image, you gain for in reality with a 27 knot speed and the increased firepower of your guns. It's a tough one. It really is a tough one to work out what's the best thing to do in that scenario. The Conte de Cavours are a good class of ship for the Italians. They give them a lot of experience, a lot of capability, and in many ways they are what secured them the status of equal with France. I had this discussion about the Washington Naval Treaty a few times. If France had built more ships, if France had managed to organise its navy more and actually build more ships, would they have got equal status with Japan? Doubt the Japanese would have wanted that. But the thing is, if they had a big enough force structure, they could have, and been willing to push for it, they could have maybe pushed for it being a, how do I put this politely, joint Britain and America, Japan, France, Italy scenario. The thing is, for Italy, all they were always pushing for is the equal of France. And the trouble is for the French is that when you're looking across at the Conte de Cavours, especially Giulio Cesare, and the Andrea Dorias, and even the Dante Alighieri, and you're looking at their ships, it's very hard for you to go, you know what, you are sufficiently reliant upon naval power, sufficiently large enough, that you need to have a larger fleet than the Italians. So, I always finish my videos with a question. I do, and it's a fun one because it can start off all sorts of debates in the comment section, and I like debates and discussions in the comments. I like discussions in the comments. I like them to be respectful. I will always remind you of that. My little cousins read them. So yes, the filters for swearing, etc. are on, because my little cousins read them, and that's the same rule I always have. I don't mind about any other YouTube channel. I don't mind about whatever people do in their personal lives. It really doesn't bother me. But I'm outnumbered by my cousins. If my little cousins learn things which they might learn them elsewhere, but if they can point to and say they learn them from my YouTube channel, which they come and watch, I'm the one who gets in trouble. So I have to make sure my YouTube channel is cleaner than clean. There are 40 of them and only one of me. Okay? That's a lot of pain coming my way if they feel that if they grew gang up on me. So the interesting question here is, as we discussed, the Leonardo da Vinci, the third of the Conte de Cavours, unfortunately suffers an accident. The class did have this habit. Suffers an accident in World War One. Here is the question. If she doesn't suffer an accident, the Italians, if we think about them, and we should, we'll have had another viable battleship. Now, I do realise she survives through Washington anyway. She is actually listed in the Washington Treaty. She's listed as 22,500 tons. Yeah, it's part of the Italian Regia Marina's claim to wanting to have an official aim of, well, 175,000 tons was their official aim. But they added in Roma, Napoli, Vittorio Emanuele, and Ranger Elena into that to try and get up their tonnage, and those were all sovereign-style battleships, which displaced 12,600 tons, and the Dante Alighieri, which was 19,500 tons weight displacement. But they were adding in everything to make up their tonnage. The realistic thing is, with their tonnage differential, if they have 175,000 tons, they have a fifth of these older ships, Andredore, those 5 older ships of their core. How do you think that affects their strategy going into World War II? Because they'll have another battleship. Now, why am I saying that any individual battleship will affect their strategy? Well, if you consider when the Italians have only a couple of battleships available, they're still prepared to be very offensive on them. But their worry is they're running a risk. There is, of course, the example I've given of the Battle of Calabria, where it's 2 v3, and Camponi is worried about the numbers. Well, if you have another battleship running around, the Leonardo da Vinci, that could well mean you have 3 at that battle. How might they react to the Battle of Calabria? How might they act at the Battle of Sirte if they have another battleship there? How might they act at any of these scenarios where they have an extra ship? The Italians were always trying to utilize their force. And I think also it's worthwhile thinking about how will the British react if the Italians have an extra ship. Because if you consider the Mediterranean fleet is a constant draw. The Mediterranean fleet, Force H, the British are having to send forces there to deal with the Italians. The amount of times I'm told by people that it's the threat of the German battleships, which means the British cannot put a force in the Far East to deter the Japanese, and it's not. Yes, that keeps usually 2 or 3 capital ships busy. But look at how many are deployed on operations of the Royal Navy's frontline ships. I'm not talking about the R-class, which are mostly used for secondary roles. I'm talking about the unmodified Queen Elizabeth, although Malaya does get an action in the Battle of Calabria. So they are semi to be included. No, if you consider the modernized Queen Elizabeth class, the King George V's, Nelson Rodney, where are these ships more often than not? Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, Warspite, they keep turning up in the Mediterranean. Nelson Rodney, they turn up in the Mediterranean to face off against the Italians. Because the Italians have the capital ships and are prepared to use them. So, if Leonardo da Vinci is not lost, is not damaged in World War I, doesn't have that accident, how does that affect things? How does that impact operations, do you think, in World War II? Because I think basing it off the Giulio Cesare and the result she achieves is not a bad scenario to think about. So basically you're saying a second Giulio Cesare wandering around. Because the Conte de Cavour, sadly enough for her, doesn't seem to have the luck. She does get hit by that torpedo. Yeah. Poor Conte de Cavour. Always so much promise. Good ship, though. So, what else we got coming up? Well, this week we have coming up, we have the conception, operation, and conclusion of HMS Ben Maishri. A lovely little ship. A really good one. A nice one to get into. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Sorry, as this is Mother's Day, I haven't done a live, but perhaps you watch the Twitch stream. Then you'll see me on Mother's Day and I'd have gone, hello. If not, hello, hope you're having a good day. If it's not Mother's Day where you are, very good. If you're not sure if it's not Mother's Day where you are, you have a few hours. Check now. I hear people can run to stores at late night and find what are termed acceptable presents. I wouldn't know. I have never pushed my luck so, but I have heard that there is an acceptable present somewhere out there at late night stores open on Sundays. Somewhere. Good luck to those who are in that case, in that situation. Good luck. And avoid the speed cameras.